Masal khair. Right now I want to talk to you about a very common structure in formal Arabic that we create using the words ma and min. We can use these words to form an expression that means something like that which or what in the way of. It often sounds very strange when we back translate it into English, but it's very common in formal Arabic texts and it's considered good style. So in order to create this structure, we often need to think in a slightly more convoluted fashion, or so it can seem in English. If we wanted to take sentence number one, she wrote all of the information she heard in her notebook. Or let's say all of the information that she heard. That might come in handy a little bit later. What we need to do is take this section and rephrase it so that it sounds more like she wrote all that she heard in the way of information. And that's going to be how we make this structure work. So she wrote katabat all of, no trouble so far, all that she heard in the way of information. So the that is going to be our ma, and the in the way of is going to be represented by min. كل ما سمعته. And here we have a reference, so literally we're kind of saying all that she heard it, because that's good style in Arabic, in the way of information. Min معلومات في دفترها. Seems pretty convoluted if you are a first language English speaker, as I am. But that's a very normal way to do things. Again, the ho sort of refers back to the ma. We won't see that in every sentence, but we will often have a sort of dummy object after a verb that's bracketed between ma and min. That's called, if you're interested, the a'id, the sort of goer-backer, the thing that refers to something that came before. Let's take another example. Despite all the advice that I gave him, he didn't succeed. Well, the advice that I gave him, now that's the part that we need to figure out. And again, if we find a that in our English equivalent, that can help us figure out where the ma min construction might be generated. So we want to say something like, despite what I gave him, in terms of or in the way of advice. There again, that's going to be where our ma and our min. So we could phrase it in Arabic. I don't have a lot of board here. برغم ما I won't complete that sentence because it's a bit long, but I can phrase it بالرغم ما أعطيته من نصائح, despite what I gave him in terms of or in the way of advice. That's how we could phrase that sentence in Arabic. Another example. The books of hers that I've read have benefited me a great deal. So we could say ما قرأته من كتبها أفادني كثيرا. So what we've done is taken the books of hers that I've read and rephrased it as that which I've read of her books. And those represent the Ma Min pivots. You're probably noticing, if you consider yourself a stylist in English, that some of these examples in English, again, are a little bit iffy. My inner editor is saying to me, ooh, that is some tortured phraseology, and we could make that better. Once again, in Arabic, this is good style, and it's very compact, you'll notice. We've added a lot of unnecessary verbiage in this convoluted English equivalent, but the Arabic is very clean. ما قرأت من كتبها. Very compact, very neat, very nice. Let's take one last example. We liked all of the paintings they have in the museum. So, all of the paintings that they have, we're going to need to say something like all that they have in the way of paintings. So, in the way of, lots of words, just one syllable in Arabic. All that they have, ma. So, أعجبنا, or it pleased us, is sort of what we're saying. كل ما عندهم من لوحات في المتحف. So one way that we can deconstruct a sentence like this when we encounter it is to think about how we might rephrase it using ism mawsul, those الذي, التي, الذين words that refer back to a noun that occurred previously in the sentence. We could, if we wanted to, probably rephrase some of these using alladhi or allati and obviate the need to use that ma min structure. The nice thing about using the ma min structure is that it is very Arabic, right? We can't really, it's tough to come up with an equivalent in English that is stylistically as elegant. But for the sake of comprehension, if we encounter a ma and a min that bracket a word and we want to make it comprehensible to ourselves, it might be worth the intellectual exercise to say, كتبت كل المعلومات التي سمعتها. She wrote down all of the information that she heard. So that's a good way to make it more comprehensible. Notice that with ma and its a'id, its dummy pronoun, it's typically going to be grammatically masculine singular. That's just the way that the ma can work here. But now that we're talking about ma'lumat, and allati refers to ma'lumat, and this object pronoun refers back to ma'lumat, we don't have a ma, we have an actual noun with an actual gender. It's a non-human plural, right? Informations, sort of. It's a plural noun. So we're going to need to use ha instead of hu here. But that's a good way to help decipher these structures when you might encounter them in a text. And despite its convoluted nature, it is a really great way, once you've gained some control over this structure, to Arabize your style. It's a nice little rhetorical flourish that you can include in your own formal writings.